Welcome back. Today we're going to have a very quick discussion about pre-generated data editors and your own custom data editors and what role they play inside AzStudio, why they're important, and why they're beneficial to your project. Now, in a lot of your projects, you're going to want to put your tools into the actual applications portal, which is most likely going to be either a lightweight HTML5 app or some kind of web app, and you're going to want to deploy that and then secure it normal using traditional methods. But how do you ramp up quickly? How do you get these tools prototyped so that you can get work done, so that you can come back later and convert these Windows or WinForms controls into something that's more web-based? That's where we come in. Now, before I get started showing you the actual mechanics of doing this, keep in mind that the full plugin tutorial is available elsewhere on our site, generally in the VM training or the training videos. So we're not going to go into great depth here, but we are going to explain the reasoning behind what we do. Okay, so plugins can be broken into two broad categories. One is the automatically generated data editors, which comprise about 80 to 90% of what you see on the screen here. The code behind on these forms have been predetermined by our generators. The other 10% are custom, more complex UI, such as wizards or things that are very, very complicated, like our designers. No matter whether they're complex or simple, they all have one general goal in mind, which is don't edit things by hand. Edit things through a UIX in a secure and unified manner. That way, your opportunities for mistakes are reduced, and the speed at which you can edit things is actually increased. Instead of doing raw SQL data loads or ETL scripts or any kind of loading scripts, those go away, and when they're replaced by our tools, and these tools are visual, and these tools are usually checking your work, and therefore making sure that data is being entered in a consistent manner, in a consistent way, and in a secure way. So we're going to show you the first type of plugin, which is the auto-generated plugin, which relies on this root dialog that we have in our visual controls. And this visual controls allows you to edit data, but also manipulate that data in a lot of interesting ways. One, it gives you a place to validate your inputs, but it also has the ability to manage all kinds of neat things, like this is where you can publish your instructions. It's where you can actually write videos like this, where you can actually explain what you're actually doing with this data. We also have the ability to have views of data, and we have the ability to transfer that information into charts. And with all that information, you automatically gain this, by the way, the ability to create reports and print out these charts. Or if you really like the chart tools, you can design your own charts. You can export them in a variety of manners. It's just a really quick way to manipulate the data that's behind your application without having to write a lot of code. And this form isn't even something you design. It's something that's generated for you through a code behind, and then it assembles this visual control based on arguments that you give it. Again, a little bit beyond the scope of this video to explain exactly how you go about generating that code, but you can see you gain a ton of functionality with no coding work whatsoever. You can even attach PowerShell scripts that are associated with this tile or this control that inherit the security model of this control, so that you have one-stop shopping basically. If you have some video help, some instructions, you want to put a report together really quick, you want to have a chart, and you want to have a couple PowerShell scripts. Maybe you have PowerShell scripts that are necessary to run if you have a particular scenario that needs to happen. Say the data is bad, or you need to detect resources that are down, etc., etc. Then that all exists here. In addition, whatever your grid view is set to, and you can group, and you can manipulate your data records, which ones you want. You can filter, but then you can save and load data sets. So you have a pretty robust built-in ETL tool. You can also copy any data that you've selected or highlighted to different targets. So it's possible for you to make sure that this data exists in all your environments simply by selecting all these records and then copy to a different DB, and maybe I can go to dev and QA, and blam, I push one button and it copies and makes sure that the data is normalized or is synchronized between the different systems. And you don't need to have an expensive or complicated tool to make that happen. So we consider this this kind of interface to be an in-between step. You want to get your code up fast. You want to be able to manipulate code while you're in development. You want to be able to move that the data that you have in these databases up without having to spend a lot of time on scripting or whatnot. You'd love to be able to have a place where you can put instructions on how you're supposed to manipulate the data. And maybe you'd like to have a really quick way to report out on data without doing a lot of overhead that web apps require. Well, here you go. This is what you got. So that's the first type of dialogue that we have in the system. Generating these dialogues is pretty easy. They can also be modified to take data from, say, a JSON data source, an in-memory data source. The default is an SQL data source, but you can easily wire them up to visualize a Cosmo query. They're pretty open and they're pretty easy to wire up and to override. Now, for a complex or more involved designer or tool, they register themselves the same way, but in this case you build the tool yourself. So you can see this is a pretty custom tool that our process designer. It has a ton of special controls and whatnot. But the advantage of this is that you can rapidly prototype these types of interfaces, use them in the interim, and then go around to publishing, if necessary, to your portal. We think that this type of process, it's easier just to give your DevOps team this tool and publish the plugins that they need to manipulate different data right in the tool, and don't even bother with the extra expense, time, and maintenance that a portal might need. Your users are probably going to want a portal, but your front-end users or your external-facing users are going to want a portal, of course. But on your back end, these tools usually get built, they serve their purpose, and then they live in perpetuity. They never really get updated. Which takes me to the final strength of doing this kind of UI/UX. In every major corporation, there are these one-off tools, ETL tools, manipulation tools, report generators. Some department needs a quick report. They don't have the money to go with a full-blown project, so they just hack something out. If they have AzStudio, that time to delivery is much shorter, but it also gives you a place to manage all of these different tools. In some cases, these tools can number tens of thousands, in some of the larger corporations, and there's no standard and no real marshaling of resources applied to those particular tools. By giving your team this host shell of AzStudio and giving them a consistent way to implement the UI/UX and to lock them down, you've got one place to go where these one-offs start to marshal together. It's also a great place to share code, right? If somebody's written this one-off tool, nobody's going to know about it if it's running on a Windows server somewhere in somebody's back office because they needed a special report. But if it's running as a plugin into AzStudio, then that can be easily shared to another team or another department, and duplication of effort can be reduced. So there you have it. The basics of why we do the UIX the way it is, why we have a Windows application rather than a portal application, and why we give you these tools to well, basically make it easier and faster to develop things in your corporation. Thanks for listening.